vote along party lines. I know I don't, but I do support John Boehner and the Republican House right now.
And that's it, Wesley. I apologize. The House is in session.
Communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. Pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on September 30th, 2013 at 2:53 p.m. that the Senate disagreed to the House amendments to the Senate amendment to the resolution, House Joint Resolution 59. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Chair lays before the House of Communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. Pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on September 30th, 2013 at 4:02 p.m. that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 3210, that the Senate passed Senate 1560. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 367, resolution providing for consideration of the Senate amendment to the Joint Resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, and waiving a requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 with respect to consideration of certain resolutions reported from the Committee on Rules.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 367 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 62, House Resolution 367, resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to take from the Speaker's table the joint resolution, House Joint Resolution 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, with the House amendments to the Senate amendment thereto, and to consider in the House, without intervention of any point of order, a motion offered by the Chair of the Committee on Appropriations or his designee, that the House recede from its amendments and concur in the Senate amendment with the amendment printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. The Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. The motion shall be debatable for 40 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Appropriations. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the motion to its adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question. Section 2. The requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a two-thirds vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House is waived with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of October 7, 2013.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. For the purpose of the debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlewoman, my dear friend from New York, the gentlewoman, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mrs. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
During consideration of this resolution, all times yield for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 367, of which we're here for today, provides for consideration of the Senate amendment to H.J. Res. 59, the Continuing Appropriations Act for fiscal year 2014. Mr. Speaker, at midnight tonight, just a few short hours from now, the federal government will shut down if Congress, that is both the House and the Senate, do not act to provide the necessary appropriations to run our government. The legislation before us today will ensure that a shutdown does not happen, and we will take important steps to ensure that Obamacare, known as Obamacare, it's the Affordable Care Act, does not have the opportunity to hurt American jobs and continue to drag down our economy by delaying the individual mandate for 1 year. Additionally, this CR will ensure that Congress is not exempt from Obamacare and that members and their staffs do not receive a special taxpayer-funded health care subsidy. These are important issues, Mr. Speaker. They're being talked about all across America today. They're being talked about all across America. They were talked about on Sunday at tables all across America as families gathered together about the rightness of what we as Republicans are attempting to do, and that is we're attempting to save this country and the American people, the free enterprise system, and free people from having to have a government-run health care system. This government-run health care system already has been estimated to cost twice of what it was expected to do, and since this health care law has come into play, for every 1 full-time job, there have been 6 part-time jobs created. We do not want a part-time working America, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our country cannot be the greatest nation in the world if we're a part-time working society. Mr. Speaker, the American people did not agree with this bill at the time it was passed, but despite that, the Democrats rammed this through the House and the Senate, signed by the President in record time, despite millions of Americans protesting all across America the same day it was passed in the House. Mr. Speaker, this has been an issue that has harmed American businesses. Business leaders, businessmen, unions, and union leaders are all gathering together to say this is the wrong thing to do. It takes advantage of those people who have health care today. It is a direct violation of what the President said it would do. And in my state of Texas, where if you have a deceptive trade practice, if you sell something one way and the product is another, it is talked about in a way that it would be against the law. What we're trying to do is change the law. Republicans over the last few years have tried to delay it, defund it, get in the way of it, change it, talk about it, and to engage the President of the United States at the highest levels. We are now at a point where there is a must-pass piece of legislation. Republicans do not intend to shut down the government, but we are insistent, Mr. Speaker, that the legislation that we bring forth today will level the playing field on a terrible piece of legislation. The American people sense unfairness, and they have seen it take place in their marketplace, in their workplace, and as we all become unemployed or move to part-time work, we will see where this devastating law of a one-size-fits-all for everybody health care plan run by the government is not a wise way to go. So that's why we're here on the floor today. Republicans are on the floor today. We were here earlier in the week. We were here last week. We've been here ever since the day it was passed. We're consistent in our behavior. Every single Republican believes this is a bad way to do things. And I think business sees that too. The American people. In a poll, New York Times and CBS poll just last week, 60% of those responded to the New York Times and CBS said they are not supportive of this bill. So, will someone stand up for the American people? Dadgum right, called the Republican Party. Our great speaker and our great leader, John Boehner and Eric Cantor, have asked us to come to the floor today to move a bill, and the Republican conference is there. We're hoping that the United States Senate and the American people all get together on this, and then President Obama will see the wisdom behind learning from mistakes that have been made in the past. I have every reason to believe that what we're doing here will be good for the American people. We will listen to their voices and we will move forth together. We're giving everybody a chance to be heard from today, and tonight will be an opportunity for the American people to know that it was the Republican Party that stood up on their behalf. I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Sessions, for yielding me the time, and yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague is certainly right. We have been here time after time after time on this issue, but we are standing on the brink, I think, of the worst government shutdown in modern history. Unlike 1994, the pending government shutdown would reach across the entire federal government. In 1994, half of the congressional appropriations bills had been signed into law by the President, and as a result, the half of the federal agencies were able to operate during the shutdown. But this year, because of the draconian budget levels included in the misguided sequester, the majority was unable to pass a single appropriations bill into law. In fact, they ran out of money about halfway, well, certainly after they got through the defense budget, and for the first time since I've been in Congress, unable to pass a transportation bill. And because of that, again, we find ourselves in this terrible position. Now, as a result, should the government shut down, it is going to be more harmful and more widespread than the last one. And, Mr. Speaker, these are very real and very serious consequences that we face. And it is in the face of these consequences that the majority has chosen to continue what are only described as dangerous partisan games. We have indeed been here before. The first time, the majority wanted to defund the Affordable Care Act. And second, they decided to just delay it, but then on that bill, they threw in a chance to do away with the medical device tax, which will create a $1 trillion deficit increase over the next 10 years, and hit women's reproductive rights next time. And just today, we saw the First Lady of Texas, Ms. Nita Perry, who said in an interview that abortion should be a woman's right, and that she believed that women should have the right to choose. And we thank her for that and couldn't agree with her more. But this, again, now what are we coming up with today? Well, we're not going to back away from anything. We're just going to try to kill the health care bill, which we know we can't do. It's taking effect tomorrow morning. But what we're going to do now, they say, is to delay the mandate, which is a large part of the funding for the bill. And in addition to that, they've decided that members of Congress and our staffs will not be able to get the government co-pay that most employed people get. In fact, most people who have health care in America get it from their employer. And we are going to be denied being able to do that because Senator Grassley, who claimed he made a mistake, inserted that into the bill, and he said just this week that he did not mean for us not to be part of the government health care system, but that somebody had misappropriated his idea and wrote it wrong. So that's where we are with that today. But the majority's proposal now today is going to do that. And they're going to say to all these young people who come to Washington with such promise and such energy and such verve, really, to try to do something good for their country and look forward so much to being able to have the great privilege of working in the capital of the United States, that they're not going to have the help with their health care, driving many of those, I think, to leave and to get other works, others to really not be able to get the health care that they need. So why do we do that? Heaven only knows. But frankly, I would be embarrassed, and I've mentioned this in the Rules Committee, to look around the room at the staff that we praise all the time for their ingenuity, for their faithfulness, for their willingness to stay as we did Sunday morning until 12:30 without ever making any complaint at all, by punishing them with health care. As offensive as this proposal is, it's a fitting example of the vision for America that the majority has. It's a vision of an America where insurance companies are put back in charge of the health care system, where price gouging and price discrimination goes unchecked, where the most vulnerable among us, including cancer patients, the victims of domestic violence, children born with pre-existing conditions, can be denied access to health care. The New York Times had some wonderful pieces on that in the Sunday Times yesterday, talking about people who have been burdened so much that they are literally bankrupt from the cost of health care. This bill takes every step to avoid that in the future. I'm not sure that people understand that what happens is that we have turned around what used to be the yearly cap insurance companies charged for their clients, and now say that if you are a person, a single person with your health insurance, that once you have paid out of pocket $6,400 for medical procedures and medicine, the insurance company then for the rest of the year will pay your costs. What's not to like about that? If you're a family, $12,000 is the cost. You will not have to see what we saw yesterday in reading the Times, that people with cancer many times were unable at all to try to even provide the care, and that we know, and I know, from the work that we have done with cancer patients, that many of them go untreated. If there's anything worse than getting cancer and to be diagnosed with cancer, it has to be being unable to pay for treatment. These are the things that the majority wants to do away with. I've never seen so much work in all my life to try to prevent 30 million Americans, our brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles, everybody, from being able to have health insurance. Many of them for the first time in their lives. I met a woman in the last campaign who told me that she was so excited because she had just signed up for Medicare. The woman was born with cerebral palsy, and under the present insurance laws, she was not at all insurable. So she went through her whole life bringing up children, running a household, driving a car, all the things that could cause the kinds of accidents that leave you permanently impaired without a dime's worth of health insurance. She was not alone in that. Children who had head injuries or other members of the family could often use up their lifetime limit of about $1 million in less than a year, and they were never insurable again in the United States. We're not going to go back to that. There's absolutely no idea. So there is something we can do here tonight. What we can do is vote this down, go back to the Rules Committee, take up the Senate clean bill, which is over here at the desk, pass that bill in the House and the rules, bring it here, pass it in the House in a bipartisan way, by the way, that wouldn't hurt, and then, lo and behold, that bill is ready to go to the President's desk. And we could get that signed, shutdown would be averted, health care would be available to people who desperately need it and desperately want it, and we should not continue to be the only industrialized country on the face of the earth that does not provide health care for its people. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule and the underlying legislation and demand that we pass the Senate bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from New York reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. The gentlewoman, my dear friend, makes many, many important points about not only the law that was passed, but about maybe some comments about what we're doing here. I have great sympathy, respect for men and women, people, children, seniors who are born with diseases that sometime emanate during their life. Great respect for that. And I do agree with the gentlewoman that our government, in a public-private partnership or in working with states, should, needed to, must create a better system to take care of those who are uninsured or a term maybe had been uninsurable. And this is where, for years, there had been a big debate in Washington about how to best do that. And the facts of the case are real simple, that every time we had an opportunity in the Republican Party to try and get that done, it became a point of decision-making by the Senate, and they blinked. The House many times passed all sorts of bills that would allow people better to be employed across state lines, better ways to make larger team sizes for insurance so that risk pools would have a better opportunity to be managed. But instead of us taking care of some 23 to 30 million people who were in this circumstance, the bill aimed at 230 million people. And it put rules and regulations and restrictions on business and hiring. And it was less about coverage and more about a hammer from Washington, D.C. There are lots of examples of this, but one of them might be the IPAB, which is the Independent Payment Advisory Group, which the Democrats wrote into law that could not receive any legislative or judicial updating. You could not challenge the law that they decided on of benefits and payments. That's just one part of this outrageously expensive and overbearing health care bill. We've talked about that. We've talked about how expensive it is and how it's causing business. Delta Airlines as an example. Delta Airlines said, and they've got a very good plan, but they came to the administration in February this last year and said it's going to cost Delta Airlines $100 million more just the first year. Now, that's not helping people. That's highway robbery. That is harming business, harming the free enterprise system. Mr. Speaker, I'm for balance. I'm for reasonableness. I'm for opportunities, and so is my party. But we are not for diminishing the greatest economy in the world by arbitrarily doing it with a one-size-fits-all Obamacare that not one Republican voted for and that Democrats are still gleeful about. So we're here today. We've been here for quite some time, as the gentlewoman admitted, yes, day after day. We're kind of relentless about this because we're worried about what's happening. We have seen employment figures, higher taxes, more spending, more government, oh, by the way, indecision along the way, where the administration really can't figure out what they're doing. And so what we're saying is that we think everybody ought to be into the same bucket that employers are in, and that is we've already delayed it, so we should do that the same for individuals. And we're going to shut down the government over that? That's the question. We're going to shut down the government, Republicans, because we want to put individuals on the same footing as what President Obama gave a pass to business? Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm from Texas, and I recognize that we like freedom and opportunity and less taxes and more opportunities. God, by golly, we employ a lot of people. But I think the whole country sees this. And what the whole country sees is the reasonableness that the Republican Party comes to the floor, and we're going to keep the battle going to say we think everybody, at least the individual, ought to be treated the same as business. We think the President of the United States made a mistake, and we're politely today trying to say, Mr. President, can we please fix that mistake? Can we please give to the individuals of this country, men and women who pay their taxes and work hard, can we give them equal representation with what you gave to people who run businesses? Now, I'm a business guy, but I'm also an individual. And that's why the Republican Party is doing what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. We are not asking for anything that's unreasonable. As a matter of fact, we're going to, if I'd hurry up, we could get it quickly to the floor to where we could vote on this. But an explanation's necessary. Reasonableness, common sense, and doing the right thing. And that's what the Republican Party is here doing. That's what our great speaker, John Boehner, is doing. That's what our awesome majority leader, Eric Cantor, is doing. We are going to bring to the floor, our Republican majority will be here, and we're going to pass this that says we believe the same thing that happens to business where the Obama administration was not ready for them, and so they gave them a pass for a year. We think the same thing is true for individuals. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, a member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. As we look up at the clock, we see that there is only 6 hours and 10 minutes to a completely unnecessary and economically harmful government shutdown. Now, I don't see the junior senator from Texas on the floor, but I presume that he has signed off on the latest feeble Republican strategy, since he seems to be the one calling all the shots around here. So I say to my Republican friends, enough. Enough of the gamesmanship, enough of the legislative ping-pong, enough of the high fives and cheers on the floor. It's time to put on your grown-up pants and do your jobs. It's a job, by the way, that should have been done months ago. The House passed the budget and the Senate passed the budget, but instead of going to a conference committee to hash out the numbers, the Republican leadership refused to appoint conferees. They refused to negotiate. And as a result, we are here on the edge of the cliff. And here's the irony, Mr. Speaker. It's clear to me, at least, that there is a majority in this House, Republican and Democrat, for passing the clean CR sent to us by the Senate. Here's another irony. That clean CR contains the numbers of my Republican friends' beloved sequester, numbers that I believe are far too low. For the life of me, I don't understand why the Republicans don't declare victory and let us get on with the business of governing. And part of that governing is ensuring that the Affordable Care Act works as well as possible for all the American people. It's the law of the land. It's going to stay that way. And neither the Senate nor the President is going to accept any changes. And let me just say a word about the so-called Vitter Amendment that is included in this bill. Unlike what my Republican friends say, the Vitter Amendment doesn't make the people who work for us live like everyone else. In fact, it singles them out for special punishment. It says to the people who help us draft legislation, who answer the phones in our offices and who respond to constituent mail, who help a veteran get his benefits or a high school student apply to the military academies, that unlike every other federal employee, their employer will not contribute a share toward their health insurance. It's a lousy, lousy thing to do. And I say to my colleagues, if you want to see an exodus of smart, dedicated people away from Congress, of both parties, if you want to see this place get even dumber, then by all means pass the Vitter Amendment. Otherwise, we should treat it like the cynical talking point that it is and vote it down. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's time for my Republican friends to put on their grown-up pants and do the right thing. I urge my colleagues to reject the rule, reject the underlying bill, and pass a clean CR. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Knoxville, Tennessee, the gentleman, Congressman Duncan.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and the underlying continuing resolution to keep the government open, and I thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding me this time. This rule and the bill it brings to the floor also makes sure that people know that we in the Congress will not receive any type of exemption or special benefit under Obamacare. For some reason, the national media has given the President a free pass by not calling on him to compromise or even negotiate at all to help keep the government open. The Republicans have compromised and have voted to fund the entire government except for only one bill, Obamacare. If a Republican president was refusing even to negotiate, he would be criticized to high heaven by the national media. We simply are trying to treat ordinary individuals the same way and give the same delay that was to individual Americans that was given to big business. I think this is a very reasonable and moderate approach that Republicans in the House have taken, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me this time.
We'll reserve our time.
The gentleman's time expired. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, a member of the Committee on Rules, Mr. Polis.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for the time. Here we are, T-minus 6 hours and 7 minutes till a shutdown of our federal government, the greatest country on the face of the earth, with such a dysfunctional Congress that we can't even keep our own government open. We'll be voting on a bill tonight that will lead to a government shutdown. Now, look, why will it lead to a government shutdown? It's because we have a separation of powers in our Constitution. This House of Representatives does not unilaterally run the country. We have a House, we have a Senate, we have a President. It takes compromise and working together to move forward as a country. These kinds of positioning bills are fine a month or two before a crisis, but with 6 hours left, all this bill that we will be voting on tonight will do is cause a government shutdown. I encourage my colleagues to reject this rule so that we can get to a serious discussion about keeping federal government open rather than forcing a shutdown of the federal government tonight, which is what will occur if the House of Representatives passes this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time I'd like to yield 1 minute to the favorite son of Humble, Texas, the gentleman, Congressman Ted Poe.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, the House again will vote to fund the government, not shut it down. And when we fund the government, we're going to do two things that are in fairness, that does not discriminate against special folks. One thing, we're going to let everybody get a postponement for a year. Why should big business be treated better than the individual citizen? It shouldn't. So let's postpone the whole plan for 1 year. And also, why should special folks in Washington get exemptions, like the White House staff, members of Congress's staff, leadership staff, committee staff? We should all be under the rules of the law that is passed. It's interesting. Obamacare, and Obama is not under Obamacare, neither the White House, neither the cabinet members, neither the staff. Why not? Let's treat everybody alike, not discriminate, and that's just the way it is.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, we are on the brink of a shutdown, a brink of sending this nation over the cliff. Tonight I speak to the American people and to my colleagues. We have a very simple task, a task of mercy and grace, a task of adulthood and recognition of our responsibility to keep this government open. I'd like to shun the party of Marie Antoinette and let them eat cake, or those who would say, let's work and play while Rome is burning, or maybe even the former Republican presidential candidate Bachmann, who says we're smiling, we got just what we want, a shutdown of the government. I would like to shun that kind of attitude and ask my colleagues to join together in a simple task, to support the clean, continuing resolution that would fund this government as we are obligated to do under the Constitution. We have the purse strings in the House to make sure that the government works, to make sure that our women and children are served and our veterans are served, to make sure that our parks are open. So all we have to do is a simple task, to stop going over the top and be able to respond as Americans. I yield back.
Recognized. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Louisville, Texas, member of the Rules Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Congressman Dr. Michael Burgess.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman for the recognition. I felt obligated to come to the floor tonight to try to set a few things straight. All of the words that have been spoken about the amendment from the senator from Iowa that was in the original Affordable Care Act that was signed by the President in March of 2010. But like so many things that were in the bill that was signed by the President, there were errors. It really wasn't ready for prime time. It was hastily pushed through the Senate, never went through any sort of process in the House after that point, and then got signed into law. And as a consequence, and Senator Grassley has been concerned about this, and he spoke just last week, he said that the original amendment requiring lawmakers and staffers to enter the Obamacare exchanges, but he didn't intend for them to lose the employer's subsidy. And he said it's frustrating. It's frustrating because if they had let those of us who knew anything about health care draft this amendment, we wouldn't have the controversy. Senator said that the Democratic Majority Leader did not properly draft the statutory language for his amendment, omitting language that would have allowed the staff to keep their employer contributions while in the exchanges. He said repeatedly that the Office of Personnel Management rule was in line with the original intent of the amendment, despite the amendment not being his. And then Senator Grassley went on to say, you understand that when we adopt an amendment in the Senate Finance Committee, unlike other committees, it's not in legal language. We describe it, but then it went to the Majority Leader's office, and when they put the statutory language in, they screwed it up. He said, if you want to know the truth, they had people who didn't know what they were doing. I don't know what their intent was, the senator continued. My goal, regardless of how the amendment was worded, was that we in Congress need to go into the exchange, so we'd have to go through the same red tape as every other citizen. And that's really what we're doing here tonight, saying that that concept, that members of Congress go through that same red tape as every other citizen in this country is required to do. And we could talk about things that have been delayed in this bill. Maybe we should spend a few minutes talking about that. Republicans have tried to short-circuit parts of the Affordable Care Act. It's actually been the President himself who's been the delayer-in-chief. Many people forget that there was a federal pre-existing program set up under the Affordable Care Act, but that federal pre-existing program closed its doors to new applicants the 1st of February of this year. That means 11 months that people go frozen out of the federal pre-existing program. The press has never held the President to account for that. We heard comments as this debate started off about the caps on out-of-pocket expenses. But, Mr. Speaker, did you realize that those caps on out-of-pocket expenses were in fact suspended by the administration earlier this year? Very little press about that. So all of the heralded good things in the Affordable Care Act, you don't know what it's going to contain when it finally kicks in because the President may stop any part of it at his discretion. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 3210, an act making continuing appropriations for military pay in the event of a government shutdown.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Budget, Mr. Van Hollen.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A simple question. Why is the Speaker of this House denying this House the opportunity to have an up or down vote on a clean continuing resolution to keep the federal government operating tomorrow and beyond? Why is he not allowing a vote? Why is he not allowing Democrats and Republicans together to have a vote on keeping the government open? Because, Mr. Speaker, if he had that vote, it would pass. It would pass on a bipartisan basis, and the government would still be operating. So apparently the Speaker is afraid that we would actually pass a bill to keep the government going. So why is he not allowing the People's House to do the people's business? Well, we've been seeing this play out around the country in the last couple of weeks. You've got a far-right extreme Tea Party element in the Republican Party that is dictating what's happening here on the floor of this House. Senator Cruz is running the show on the floor of this House. Mr. Speaker, why don't you just quicken it up and pass Senator Cruz the gavel and let him run the House? Now, why is it that this group of members wants to shut down the government? Because tomorrow, millions of Americans are going to get access to affordable health care. Millions of Americans are already benefiting from the protections of the Affordable Care Act, but tomorrow, millions more will get access to affordable care. And Republicans are so bent, at least this Tea Party faction, on blocking that from happening, on preventing those millions of Americans from getting access to affordable care, that they're prepared to shut down this government. That is a scandal. Mr. Speaker, the other thing I cannot figure out, if I could have another minute.
Yield the gentleman another minute.
The other thing that's really puzzling is while our Republican colleagues want to shut down the government to prevent the American people from getting access to the benefits of the Affordable Care Act, right? Access to the exchange, where you have a marketplace of different plans being offered, and a little help for those who are stretched thin and can't afford it. While our Republican colleagues want to shut down that part and other important parts of the Affordable Care Act, guess what the Republicans kept in their own budget? They kept the Medicare savings. I remember Mitt Romney and the vice presidential candidate saying how those were going to be the ruin of the country. Well, guess what? In the Republican-passed budget that virtually every Republican member of this House voted for, they kept those savings. And guess what else they kept? They kept the same level of revenue that would be generated by Obamacare. Just check the Heritage Foundation statement. Every penny of revenue from Obamacare, that level of funding is assumed in the Republican budget. So here we have Republicans right around the country saying they got a balanced budget, which is balanced because of Obamacare, and here saying they want to defund Obamacare. You just can't have it both ways. Don't shut down the government. Let's pass the bill that came out of the Senate, send it to the President, get it done tonight. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I do appreciate my dear friend, the gentleman from Maryland, coming to the floor and speaking. But I want to say something real fast, if we can, Mr. Speaker. This is to fund the government. Second part, this is to say that the President of the United States gave a pass to business. The pass was because the President has not provided enough content and information to business to let them know how it's supposed to work. But we're not going to do the same for individuals. And that's what this legislation says. We're going to fund the government. We're not trying to stop having people from receiving things. We're trying to say, give us the same opportunity, because the individuals that it does help, I do have a sense of responsibility about them. But times thousands of more that will be harmed by what we're doing is not a balance that Republicans can put up with, the overriding effect. So, in fact, we're here. I can look myself straight in the mirror. Mr. Speaker, we're trying to do the right thing for the American people. This time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to a distinguished gentleman, member of the Rules Committee, and a very bright young man, the gentleman from Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my chairman for yielding me the time, and I thank him for his leadership in the Rules Committee. We've been here night after night after night, I say to my chairman, trying to keep the government open. And to my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle, we have an opportunity to work together. I'm a hardcore right-wing Georgia Republican, and I'm here to tell you I want to keep the government open. And I don't think there's a one of you over there who questions my word that I'm here today to keep the government open, not to bring the government to a halt. But there are also other concerns, and the biggest frustration I've had, Mr. Speaker, in my 2.5 years here in the House is that the President doesn't want to talk with me and my 700,000 constituents about our priorities for America. I carry a copy of the Constitution in my pocket, Mr. Speaker, and it lays out clearly our bicameral system here in Congress, our Article 1 Congress, our Article 2 White House, our Article 3 courts. The President has been saying over and over and over again, as we come up upon this brink of a government shutdown, I will not negotiate. Over and over again, Mr. Speaker. I will not negotiate. Now, so often it's so easy for my friends to characterize Republicans as being folks who are just looking for a fight. I've been down here with my Republican colleagues as they have passed a bill to fund the government and completely repeal Obamacare. I've been down here with my Republican colleagues where they came back and they passed a bill to fund the government but just delay the most troublesome parts for a year. And now I'm back down here again with my Republican colleagues with a bill that will fund the government but simply prevent the individual mandate from compelling individuals to engage in behavior they didn't want to engage in, and to ensure that all Americans have access to the same set of rules that are applying to Congress. I don't know how to be any more fair than that. Harry Reid said, we don't need to have any more conversations. Folks, we have more serious problems than keeping the government open if the rule book for how this place is to operate no longer means anything. Mr. Speaker, if the President just gets to decide how it's going to be, and that's going to be the way America runs, we no longer have a constitutional republic. We have something very, very different. We're here on the floor today to keep the government open. We're here on the floor today to continue to try to negotiate. I'm very proud of what my chairman's done in the Rules Committee in terms of bringing us together, trying to build a program that unites people rather than divides people. You have to be seeing the same headlines I'm seeing. Delta Airlines dropping employees, Home Depot dropping employees, UPS dropping employees, Kroger dropping employees. You have to be seeing that, and it has to hurt you in the same way it hurts me. Let's come together and solve that problem. This is a step in that direction. Much more negotiation to be done that I hope we'll do over the next few weeks. Support this rule, support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis.
The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I've been told that when elephants fight, the grass is bruised. And when Democrats and Republicans fight beyond what is reasonable, the people are hurt, and many of them will not survive. It's time for us to move beyond this debate. Somebody said the other day that justice delayed was justice denied. Well, I can tell you that treatment for a stroke victim delayed, treatment for cancer, treatment for dialysis, treatment and for liver ailment, delayed. All of those are trips to the early grave. It's time to vote in the Senate resolution. Forget about shutting down the government and breathe life into our process and life for the American people. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, some of my favorites in the Democratic Party are taking their chances to come down tonight. And this spirited debate and opportunity by the very best of the Democratic Party is here. And I admire these men. I began serving with Mr. Davis some 17 years ago, and he's one of the most honorable and respected members of this body, and I'm delighted that Danny has come down. Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from the 6th District of Florida, distinguished gentleman, Congressman DeSantos.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, one of the realities of Obamacare is that millions of Americans are going to lose their employer-provided health insurance and be put into exchanges. And as you look through the 2,500 pages, there's actually a provision that makes Congress eat its own cooking. It takes Congress, voted on in 2010, passed by both houses, signed by the President, out of the congressional and federal plan and puts them into Obamacare exchanges. Well, as we get close to the day of reckoning, October 1st and January 1st, when the exchanges fully take effect, a lot of people around here don't like that. And so as we were leaving for August recess, the administration issued a ruling through the bureaucracy granting subsidies to members of Congress, essentially rewarding their political friends without any basis in the statute, and indeed subsidies that Americans who get removed from their employer plan will not be allowed to get in the private sector. And so I think this rule allows members to go on record. Does Congress deserve this bailout? The statute wasn't read and understood. They're looking for an easy escape. You need to go on record and say whether you want to get this bailout. Should Congress receive benefits for its members that are not available to private sector employees who are in the same situation? I think the answer to that is no. And I'll cite James Madison in Federalist 57. Madison said that the beauty of a constitutional system is that the ruling class can make no law which does not have its full operation on them and their friends as on the great mass of society. Congress should not be treated differently. This rule allows members of this body to go on record, so I'm glad that the chairman has written it, and I thank you for giving me time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to yield a minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
For well over a year, Republicans have forced our country to lurch from one politically manufactured crisis to another. Last year, they cost us over $1 billion in a manufactured crisis over the debt limit. They began New Year's Day with a last-second pullback from a plunge over the fiscal cliff. And now they're up to their old shenanigans of shutting down the government, and that manufactured crisis is just a few days before the next one they manufactured over the full faith and credit of the United States. This is no way to run a Congress, and it's no way to run a country. And the only path out is the same path that allowed us to escape the disaster on New Year's Day. And that is to permit the same action that we took that finally got relief for the Hurricane Sandy victims. And the only way we passed the Violence Against Women Act, and that's to let majority rule apply on the floor of this House. And until we do that, we will have a crisis. Does the gentlelady have additional time?
I will yield another minute to the gentleman from
Gentleman's
Texas.
recognized for another minute.
What we have to do is end the hammerlock of the shutdown caucus in the Republican Party. And when the Speaker finally lets a majority of this House, a bipartisan majority of Republicans and Democrats, vote on continuing the necessary operations of our government, if they'll do that tonight, it will pass in 5 minutes. It's just a question of whenever they decide to stop letting the shutdown caucus control what happens in the future of this Congress. It's the way we got relief on New Year's Day. It's the way we addressed the concerns of the Hurricane Sandy victims. It's the way we passed the Violence Against Women Act. And it's the way this country must move forward. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to yield 1 minute for the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the springtime, the Republican Party passed a budget in the House, and a few weeks later, the Senate passed a budget in the Senate. And there was an attempt to bring the two parties together in a conference to work out the differences so there could be a budget for the year that begins tomorrow. The House Republicans refused to start that negotiation. So it came back after Labor Day. It became pretty obvious that we were going to reach this point on September 30th, a government shutdown, unless something was done. The Republicans opened the bidding, as they always do, by saying we want a lower level of spending and we want to get rid of the health care bill. What's happened since then between the House and the Senate is the Senate has said, all right, we'll take the lower level of spending, but we'll keep the health care bill. You get one thing you want, you don't get both things you want. That's the compromise. Now, we could be voting on that compromise this evening and end the government shutdown, because if it were on the floor, it would pass. We have a chance in a couple of minutes. I would ask the gentlelady for 30 more seconds.
I yield 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for additional 30
Thank
seconds.
the gentlelady. We have a chance in a couple of minutes to make that happen. If the members vote no on the question that's about to come up, it will have the practical effect of getting rid of this proposal and putting on the Senate floor, or putting on the House floor, rather, the Senate bill that could pass and end the government shutdown. Let's vote on the compromise. Let's give everyone here the chance to let the people work their will and end this ridiculous government shutdown that looms over the country. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New York.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries.
The gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from New York. The House GOP has once again exposed its extremism for all of the American people to see. The resolution that underlies this rule is dead on arrival in the Senate and will not be signed into law by the President. And so what we have embarked on is a futile legislative joyride that will only end in a government shutdown, that will hurt children, hurt families, hurt the military, hurt senior citizens, and hurt our economy. This is an unnecessary Shakespearean tragedy. Why are we continuing to fight a battle that you have already lost? You lost it in 2010 legislatively when this Congress passed the Affordable Care Act. You lost it jurisprudentially in a court of law when the Supreme Court in 2012 declared the Affordable Care Act constitutional. And then you lost it politically last November when the President was reelected to a second term. Why are we continuing to litigate an issue that has already been resolved? It's time to confront reality. The Affordable Care Act is the law of the land. Let's move on and get back to doing the business of the American people.
Gentleman yields back. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Nolan.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the simple truth is, and everyone in this free world, for that matter, knows it, these amendments are intended for the sole purpose of shutting down the government. They're not going anywhere. Everybody knows it. To deny this House of Representatives an opportunity for an up or down vote is an affront to the American people. It's an affront to this institution. It's an affront to democracy and every member in this House. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, reject this rule so we can have a vote